我宣布安全理事会第9114次会议现在开始。本次会议的临时议程是对国际和平与安全的威胁。议程通过。按照安理会暂行议事规则第37条，我邀请乌克兰代表参加本次会议，就这样决定。按照安理会暂行议事规则第39条，我邀请主管政治和建设和平事务的副秘书长迪卡洛女士参加本次会议，就这样决定。安理会现在开始审议议程项目2。我现在请迪卡洛女士发言。
Mr. President, the United Nations remains gravely concerned about the dangerous situation in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. The plant continues to be operated by Ukrainian technical personnel, but has been under the control of the military forces of the Russian Federation since early March. In early August, disturbing reports of an escalation of shelling around the plant began to emerge. The Secretary General has appealed to all concerned to exercise common sense and reason and to refrain from undertaking any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety, or security of the nuclear plant, Europe's largest. On 15 August, the Secretary General discussed the issue of the plant's safety during a call with Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu. On 18 August, during his visit to Lviv, he discussed the situation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In all his statements and meetings, the Secretary General has continued to call for all military activities in the immediate vicinity of the plant to cease immediately and for all sides to refrain from targeting its facilities or surroundings. All military personnel and equipment must be withdrawn from the plant. There should be no further deployment of forces or equipment to the site. The facility must not be used as part of any military operation, and an agreement on a safe parameter of demilitarization to ensure the safety of the area should be reached. Regrettably, despite numerous calls and appeals, instead of de-escalation, we continue to see the almost daily reports of alarming incidents involving the plant. Today, the Director General of the IAEA renewed his request to send an IAEA mission to carry out essential safety, security, and safeguard activities at the site. Preparations for the mission are proceeding, and the IAEA is in active consultations with all parties regarding its efforts to send such a mission as soon as possible. We welcome Ukraine and Russia's recent statements indicating support for the IAEA's aim to send a mission to the plant, which would be IAEA's first to that site since the start of the war. Mr. President, common sense must prevail to avoid any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety, or security of the plant. As the Secretary General stressed in his briefing at the Council yesterday, the commitment to dialogue and results must be applied to the critical situation at the plant. If such incidents continue to escalate, we could face a disaster. The United Nations continues to fully support the critical work of the International Atomic Energy Agency and its efforts to ensure the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and other nuclear facilities in Ukraine. In close contact with the IAEA, the UN has assessed that we have the logistics and security capacity in Ukraine to support any IAEA mission to the plant from Kyiv, provided Ukraine and Russia agree. we once again urge the parties to provide the IAEA mission with immediate, secure, and unfettered access to the site. Agreement is urgently needed to reestablish Zaporizhzhia as purely civilian infrastructure and to ensure the safety of the area. We must be clear that any potential damage to the plant or any other nuclear facilities in Ukraine leading to a possible nuclear incident would have catastrophic consequences not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. Similarly, any damage leading to the plant being cut from the Ukrainian power grid would have catastrophic humanitarian implications, particularly with winter approaching. As the Secretary General has made clear, the electricity produced at the Zaporizhzhia plant belongs to Ukraine. At this moment, it is imperative that we receive the express commitment of the parties to stop any military activities around the plant and to enable its continued safe and secure operations. To paraphrase the Secretary General's blunt warning, any potential damage to Zaporizhzhia is suicidal. Thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢迪卡洛女士刚才所做的通报。我现在请安理会成员发言。我请俄罗斯代表发言。
Господин председатель, благодарим заместителя генерального секретаря Розмари Ди Карло за ее брифинг. Хотел бы в контексте этого брифинга отметить, что мы услышали ее слова о том, что электричество Запорожской атомной электростанции принадлежит Украине. Но хотели бы обратить внимание, что вы не слышали подобных слов от секретариата ни в отношении замороженных на Западе российских финансовых активов или сирийской нефти, которую разворовывают американские власти, которые незаконно оккупируют часть территории Сирии. Не слышали этого никогда. С прошлого заседания Совета по Запорожской атомной электростанции прошло около 2 недель. За это время ситуация с ядерной безопасностью на ней еще больше деградировала. Вооруженные силы Украины продолжают практически ежедневно обстреливать территорию станции и города Энергодар, создавая реальный риск радиационной аварии на Запорожской атомной электростанции с катастрофическими последствиями для всего европейского континента. По информации Минобороны России и военно-гражданской администрации Запорожской области, 11 августа подразделения 44-й артиллерийской бригады ВСУ совершили обстрел станции 152 миллиметровых орудий. В результате ударов было повреждено оборудование брызгательных бассейнов системы охлаждения ядерных реакторов. 14 августа в ВСУ совершено 10 обстрелов ЗАЭС 155 миллиметровыми снарядами гаубицы М777 американского производства, а также выпущено 2 управляемых боеприпаса. В результате обстрела города Энергодара погиб 1 человек, еще 1 был ранен. 15 августа выпущено 30 снарядов из 152 миллиметровых орудий. 17 августа 11 снарядов, а также запущен беспилотный летательный аппарат «Камикадзе» польского производства. Нанесено 3 удара барражирующими боеприпасами по Энергодару. 18 августа по Энергодару было зафиксировано 7 обстрелов средствами тяжелой артиллерии. 20 августа с позиции украинских войск вновь велся огонь по станции с использованием тяжелой артиллерии снарядами американского производства для вооружений 155 миллиметрового калибра с американскими взрывателями М379. Нанесен артиллерийский удар в район спецкорпусов номер 1 и 2 и лабораторно-бытового корпуса. В результате удара повреждены здания лабораторного бытового корпуса номер 2, здание гидротехнического цеха и освещение станции. Сразу после обстрела станции был открыт огонь по пригороду Энергодара. 22 августа нанесен удар БПЛА в район лабораторно-бытового корпуса номер 2. Кроме того, из американского дальнобойного артиллерийского оружия обстреляна ТЭС Энергодара. По имеющимся сведениям, один мирный житель погиб, один был ранен. Я хочу вам показать фото разрушений на территории Запорожской атомной электростанции в результате обстрела вооруженных сил Украины. У нас целая подборка таких фотосвидетельств. Мы распространили ее сегодня утром в качестве официальных документов Совета Безопасности и Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН. То, что киевский режим не прекращает атаки на станцию, прямое следствие преступного попустительства со стороны его западных покровителей. На прошлом заседании ни одной западной делегации не хватило решимости обсудить обстрелы станции со стороны ВСУ и призвать киевский режим их прекратить. Не нашлось такой смелости и в европейских столицах. Оттуда лишь звучат абсурдные призывы к России прекратить некие недавние действия вокруг ЗАЭС. Такое ощущение, что наши коллеги существуют в какой-то своей параллельной реальности, в которой российские военные сами обстреливают станцию, которую охраняют, да еще и из американских систем. Апофеозом этого абсурда стали недавние заявления британского парламентария Тобиаса Элвуда и члена Палаты представителей США Адама Кинзингера, что обстрелы ЗАЭС могут стать поводом для задействования статьи 5 Североатлантического договора. При этом в западных СМИ раскручиваются выводы американского агентства по контролю над вооружениями и разоружением о том, что ничего страшного для населения Западной Европы в обстрелах ЗАЭС и даже гипотетической аварии нет. Мол, масштабной катастрофы не будет, станция должна выдержать удар ракет, а если и не выдержит, радиоактивный язык до стран Западной Европы не дотянется. То, что даже при наименее разрушительном сценарии пострадает как минимум население Запорожской области, наши западные коллеги, видимо, готовы по традиции отнести к сопутствующему ущербу. Видимо, в этом проявляется их забота о правах человека и человекоцентричной безопасности, о которой западные делегации так долго вчера рассуждали на заседании Совета. Такое циничное отношение к населению Украины – еще одно свидетельство того, что западных кураторов Киева нисколько не волнует его судьба, и они готовы сражаться до последнего украинца. Катастрофы в результате обстрелов ЗАЭС со стороны ВСУ пока удается избежать только благодаря совместной слаженной работе работников станции, пожарных и аварийных расчетов и российских военнослужащих, оказывавших им всестороннюю экстренную помощь. Это подтверждает, что на станции здоровая рабочая атмосфера, и никто никого там не притесняет. Вопреки ложным заявлениям киевского режима и его кураторов, Россия не размещает на территории ЗАЭС тяжелое вооружение и не использует станцию в военных целях. Минобороны России готова предоставить МАГАТЭ снимки высокого разрешения, на которых видно, что оружие, тем более тяжелое, на территории станции не размещается. Господин председатель, недавно на Украине с визитом побывал генеральный секретарь ООН Антонио Гутерреш. Мы связывали с его поездкой определенные надежды. Рассчитывали, что он наконец-то твердо потребует от Киева прекратить обстрелы станций. Но мы не услышали от генерального секретаря слов осуждения происходящего, кроме призыва к тому, что, цитирую, военные действия должны обходить ЗАЭС стороной. Хотелось бы спросить у госпожи Ди Карло, удалось ли генеральному секретарю добиться от Владимира Зеленского обещания прекратить обстрелы станций? Какую оценку секретариат ООН может дать тому, что обстрелы станций со стороны Украины продолжаются в свете высказанной МАГАТЭ глубокой обеспокоенностью ситуации? Мы с первого дня поддерживали усилия МАГАТЭ и его гендиректора Рафаэля Гросси по организации миссии на ЗАЭС. Сделали все возможное для того, чтобы визит экспертов агентства на станцию состоялся еще в июне, дав согласие на эту миссию еще 3 июля. Тогда поездка сорвалась не по нашей вине. Сегодня же мы слышим абсурдные рассуждения в иностранной печати, что западные страны чуть ли не продавили согласие России на организацию этой миссии. Ожидаем, что миссия МАГАТЭ все же состоится в ближайшее время, и специалисты агентства смогут подтвердить реальную обстановку на станции. Мы готовы оказать максимально возможное содействие в решении всех организационных вопросов. Господин председатель, в заключение я хотел бы привлечь внимание членов Совета к трагедии, которая случилась 20 августа в Подмосковье. Был взорван автомобиль, за рулем которого находилась известный независимый журналист, военный корреспондент и политолог Дарья Дугина. Нашими компетентными органами ведется следствие. Предварительно ими установлено, что за этим чудовищным преступлением стоят украинские спецслужбы. Установлена личность его непосредственной исполнительницы, связанной с националистическим батальоном «Азов». Ей удалось скрыться от правосудия на территории Эстонии. Дарье Дугиной было 29 лет. Ее жизнь оборвалась в самом расцвете. В силу своей профессиональной деятельности журналист уже давно была на прицеле у украинских националистов. Вот ее фото с печально известного сайта «Миротворец», о котором мы неоднократно говорили. Они открыто бравируют ее убийством. Как видите, фото Дарьи Дугиной перечеркнуто с надписью «Ликвидировано». Отмечаем, что это преступление осудил официальный представитель Госдепа США. Мы призываем Совет и руководство ООН решительно осудить это очередное преступление киевского режима. Он не только активно использует ядерный шантаж, обстреливая ЗАЭС и удерживая, по сути, население Европы в заложниках, но и перешел все границы, прибегая к физической расправе над неугодными гражданскими лицами из числа иностранных граждан. Причем его жертвой стала независимый журналист, убитая из-за своей профессиональной деятельности. Официальные представители киевского режима открыто призывают убивать русских. Посол Украины в Казахстане Петр Врублевский недавно публично заявил, что целью Украины является убийство наибольшего числа русских, мол, чем больше их будет убито сейчас, тем меньше русских придется убивать следующим поколениям украинцев. Возмущены тем, что западные страны не просто все это не осуждают, но и помогают украинским спецслужбам готовить подрывников-диверсантов для истребления неугодных. Яркий пример ситуации с украинским гражданином Карпенко, который был завербован украинскими спецслужбами на территории Чехии и проходил диверсионную подготовку по минно-подрывному делу на военной базе на территории чешского города Český Krumlov. Его учили закладывать взрывные устройства в зданиях и автомобилях, после чего направили на территорию Донецкой Народной Республики для совершения теракта в здании администрации Володарского района. К счастью, Карпенко явился с повинной, но если бы он совершил задуманное, масштабы жертв среди мирного населения даже страшно представить. В этом контексте уже не удивляет, что власти Чехии перешли все нормы морали, открыто злорадствуя по поводу убийства Дарьи Дугиной. Министр обороны Чехии Яна Чернохова заявила, что ей не жаль ни Дарью, ни ее отца, а также, что ночь, цитирую, на 21 августа в России запомнят надолго. Конец цитаты. И в последующей дискуссии подтвердила, что стоит за каждым своим словом. Но даже если оставить в сторону мораль, которую у наших западных коллег уже давно затмила русофобия, высказывание госпожи Черноховой, по сути, открытая поддержка и пропаганда теракта в отношении гражданского лица. Хотел бы напомнить, что гражданин Чехии Чермак, который публично поддержал теракт в новозеландском городе Крайстчерч, получил в Чехии 6 лет тюрьмы. Ожидаем, что компетентные органы Чехии также серьезно отнесутся к заявлению Минобороны этой страны и дадут им соответствующую оценку. Благодарю вас.
感谢俄罗斯代表的发言，下面请加蓬代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her insightful briefing. In recent weeks, information on the risk of a nuclear accident in Ukraine has become more insistent. The intensification of military activity in the vicinity of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the allegation of the use of this nuclear power plant for military purposes raise the specter of a nuclear disaster with potential incalculable consequences. A couple of weeks ago, we gathered in this room to express our collective indignation at the likelihood that such an outcome could happen. All military activity at nuclear sites must cease. Parties to the conflict must refrain from any attacks, including cyber attacks on nuclear sites, and from any rhetoric that tends to use nuclear risk as a weapon of war. We call for independent and impartial investigation to establish responsibility for the attacks and other bombing targeting the Zaporizhzhia power plant. In the meantime, it is crucial that the belligerents respect the nuclear security rules in force and cooperate with IAEA with a view to securing the sites. We welcome the intention expressed by the parties to facilitate the conduct of an IAEA expert mission, and we urge them to find a common ground on the operational modalities of this mission, which we all call for Ukraine as soon as possible. It is not acceptable to wait and speculate on the potential risk of adding devastating environmental and human health effects to the economic and humanitarian impacts. After 6 months of war, suffering, and destruction, we think it's time to bring back peace to the heart of our priority agenda. My country encourages all initiatives aimed at bringing the parties to the negotiating table for peaceful coexistence. As long as the fighting continues, the situation in Ukraine will surely continue to worsen. The surest way to ward off multifaceted security threat is to end hostilities. We encourage all political and diplomatic effort to stop escalation, to silence the guns, and reach an agreement for a lasting peace between the parties. The grain agreement recently concluded is a source of hope on the possibility of convening a ceasefire agreement to pave the way for good faith negotiation for a return to sustainable peace. My country supports all international and regional efforts aiming at restoring peace in Ukraine. I thank you very much.
我感谢加蓬代表的发言。下面请阿联酋代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank also Ms. DiCarlo for her timely briefing. Since our last meeting on August 11th, the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant continues to be deeply alarming. Despite urgent calls for de-escalation, we have continued to receive news of shelling in the proximity of the power plant. We underline once more that shelling around nuclear facility puts Ukraine, the wider region, and the whole world at a grave risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident. The example of Chernobyl has been frequently invoked in this chamber and elsewhere, and with reason. We remember all too well the horrendous consequences. The world cannot afford a scenario where another such calamity is even a possibility. When it comes to nuclear matters, our collective security is truly intertwined. It is a message that has been reinforced these last weeks during the 10th Review Conference of the Parties of the NPT here in New York. Nuclear safety is a critical issue for the United Arab Emirates and is a matter of priority. We remain committed to supporting all efforts ensuring the safety and security of nuclear facilities globally, including through our work with the IAEA and through our participation at the IAEA's Board of Governors. In this regard, we underline once again that the importance of refraining from any action that could further endanger the facility, particularly considering the volatile and fraught situation. And we echo the IAEA's Director General Grossi's recent statement calling for the urgent need to lower tensions near the plant. We further stress again that particular protection accorded to nuclear plants under international law. United Arab Emirates also reiterates the importance of the IAEA, that the IAEA has full unimpeded access to the site in order to assess the damage and ascertain the safety of the facility. We welcome that both parties support such a mission, and we urge that it can be conducted in an expeditious manner. Mr. President, we are a day away from marking 6 months since the beginning of the conflict. It remains crucial to advocate for constructive dialogue that will bring the conflict to a peaceful, sustainable resolution in a way that is consistent with the UN Charter and international law. The only way to truly stop the suffering brought by this conflict and to stem its consequences, including the risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident, is through achieving a cessation of hostilities throughout Ukraine. We, the members of this Council, must work towards fulfilling its mandate and take incremental and programmatic steps to support efforts toward diplomatic end to the conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢阿联酋代表的发言。下面请挪威代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, USG DiCarlo, for your timely briefing. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine has endangered nuclear safety and security in Ukraine, in the Russian Federation, in Europe, and beyond. And we reject the Russian Federation's use of the Security Council as a platform for disinformation. There is no doubt that the safety and security in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has deteriorated because of the presence of an armed aggressor. Russia's continued illegal war has increased the risk of a nuclear accident with potentially catastrophic consequences for human health and the environment. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency has outlined 7 indispensable pillars for nuclear safety and security, which we fully endorse. We note with great distress that virtually all seem to have been violated as a consequence of Russian aggression. We call for maximum military restraint in the area of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And we emphasize the importance of facilitating a mission from the IAEA to carry out essential safety, security, and safeguards activities while fully respecting Ukrainian sovereignty. In this regard, we note recent statements indicating that both Ukraine and Russia could support the IAEA aim to send a mission to Zaporizhzhia. Mr. President, we remain concerned that Russia's seizure of a nuclear power plant in Ukraine is also a means of taking hostage a central source of electricity supply essential to the civilian population of Ukraine. We call on Russia to return full control of the plant to its Ukrainian operator. And we commend Ukraine for its commitment and dedication to ensuring continuous nuclear safety and security under severe circumstances. Mr. President, Russia's illegal war and unprovoked aggression has caused terrible suffering for the people of Ukraine and beyond, including aggravating global food insecurity. Let me end by again reiterating that the Russian Federation must immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine and its internationally recognized borders and cease all threats and military actions. This would also restore Ukraine's ability to ensure safe and secure operations of all of its nuclear facilities. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢挪威代表的发言。下面请美国代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your briefing, Undersecretary General DiCarlo. We commend the Secretary General for his recent visit to Ukraine, and we greatly appreciate the UN's continued efforts to address the increasingly dangerous situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Colleagues, the issue at hand today is not some abstract political debate, and this is not some far-off problem. As we speak, Ukraine, neighboring states, the entire international community are living under the threat of a nuclear catastrophe. And people are, understandably, terrified. People like Tamara Karolkova, a 70-year-old grandmother who can see the plant from her apartment building. She has nightmares about the plant blowing up. As she told a reporter for National Public Radio, all of us are just scared all the time. And for what? Why on earth is a nuclear facility being used as a staging ground for war by Russian forces? These questions can only be answered by President Putin and could have been answered by members of the Russian delegation who sit here today. Only they can explain why Russia thinks it can redraw international borders by force in contravention of the UN Charter. Only they can account for the atrocities they have carried out against the Ukrainian people, bombings of schools and hospitals, the killing of aid workers and journalists, execution-style murders, and the forced deportations of Ukrainian civilians through so-called filtration operations. And only they can explain where their troops recklessly attacked and seized control of this plant, pushing us to the brink of nuclear disaster. I will recall again Ukraine's impeccable record of nuclear energy safety and security prior to Russia's seizure of this facility. But we didn't hear answers from the Russian delegation. What we heard were references to a hodgepodge of websites and tweets. And of course, that's a double-edged sword. As I would remind the Russian delegation, it was the Russian ambassador in Vienna who just a few days ago tweeted, "No mercy for the Ukrainian people." Nevertheless, a nuclear disaster at the plant is avoidable. Russia created this risk, and only Russia can defuse it. The solution is not complicated. Russia must end its unprovoked, unjustified war and withdraw its troops. And given the urgency of this situation, Russia must immediately follow the recommendation of Secretary General Guterres and establish a demilitarized zone in the area surrounding the plant. This would allow for the Ukrainian personnel, who are currently being held under duress, to operate the facility, complete a damage assessment, and restore the facility's impeccable safety, security, and safeguards performance. And a demilitarized zone would enable the IAEA team to travel to the facility, conduct an inspection, and assess the safety, security, and application of safeguards to ongoing nuclear plant operations. We also call on Russia to agree to an IAEA visit to the facility in a way that will respect Ukrainian sovereignty. And we echo the words of the Secretary General, that the electricity from Zaporizhzhia is Ukrainian electricity, and that this principle must be fully respected. Finally, let me close by reminding my Russian colleagues that as we approach Ukraine's Independence Day, the world is watching. This should not need saying, but please do not bomb schools, hospitals, orphanages, or homes. We will continue to pursue accountability for any and all violations of international law. And today, on the eve of the 6-month anniversary of Russia's invasion, we reiterate the message that we have shared with the Russian delegation throughout their war of choice. In the suffering, in the bloodshed, in this war. Thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢美国代表的发言，现在请爱尔兰代表发言。
Thank you, President, and I'd like to thank you, SG DiCarlo, for your briefing. President, Ireland continues to be deeply concerned by the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the serious risk of a radiological accident or incident arising from military activity at that site. We are also very concerned by the ongoing shelling at and around the power plant, which must stop immediately. The devastating consequences for the people of Ukraine and the wider region of an accident or incident at Zaporizhzhia should be the overriding concern for all of us. We strongly support the Secretary-General's call for the demilitarization of the plant and its environs. President, it is essential that basic principles of nuclear safety and security are fully respected. We call on Russia, and indeed all states, to commit themselves to the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security, as set out by the IAEA Director General regarding peaceful nuclear facilities and materials in all circumstances, including in situations of armed conflict. We commend the bravery and professionalism of the Ukrainian personnel at the plant, who have sought to maintain its safe operation despite being subjected to intolerable circumstances by Russian military forces. We strongly support an IAEA mission to the power plant to address safety, security and safeguards at the plant, respecting Ukraine's sovereignty over its full territory and infrastructure. We welcome Secretary-General Guterres' reaffirmation, and as expressed by USG DiCarlo, that the UN has the logistical and security capacity to support the mission from Kyiv to the nuclear power plant. It is vital that this mission can have full access with no restrictions. We hope to see that mission take place as soon as possible. We are also deeply worried by possible efforts to disconnect the power plant from the Ukrainian electrical grid. In the circumstances, this presents significant dangers for nuclear safety, as well as for the humanitarian needs of the people of Ukraine, who are relying on it for their energy needs. President, let's call a spade a spade. The issues at Zaporizhzhia arise solely from Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. The Russian military have created this crisis through their illegal seizure and occupation of the Zaporizhzhia facility and their reckless actions in Ukraine, which have clearly demonstrated their utter disregard for nuclear safety and security. We recall that armed attacks against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes are violations of international law, including the principles of the UN Charter. President, as we have said before, if Russia is genuine in its concern regarding nuclear safety at Zaporizhzhia, it must assume its responsibilities and end its illegal occupation of the site, withdrawing its troops and munitions. This would see control of the plant restored to the competent Ukrainian authorities, supported by the IAEA. Ireland again calls on Russia to end its brutal war against the Ukrainian people and withdraw its troops from the entire internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, and to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbours. Thank you.
我感谢爱尔兰代表的发言，下面请加纳代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for the updates on the rising international safety concerns on the state of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. When this council met on the same subject a little over a week ago, the IAEA, through its Director General, warned of potentially tragic consequences for human lives and the environment in the event of the accidental leakage of radioactive material from the nuclear facility. Ghana regrets that despite the warnings and spirited appeals from the international community for all military action around the facility to cease, the indiscriminate shelling, attacks, and militarization of the nuclear facility and its vicinity has continued. We are constrained to repeat once again our grave alarm and condemnation of these unacceptable developments. We wish to remind the armed parties that the international law, including the 1977 amendment to the Geneva Convention, prohibits the conduct of military conflicts around nuclear sites. We also call for the immediate and full respect for the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment by all the armed parties. We call for the demilitarization of all the zones around Ukraine's nuclear facilities. In this respect, Ghana fully supports an independent assessment of the nuclear safety standards and safeguards at the Zaporizhzhia facility to assure that no breach has occurred. For this to happen, however, it is crucial for the Russian Federation, which exercises control of the facility, to grant immediate access to the IAEA in order for the agency to conduct the requisite assessment. We also stress the urgency for the IAEA authorities to act quickly to assess the danger and respond appropriately. Mr. President, Ghana continues to hold the principled position that there is no military solution to the ongoing military hostilities. We therefore urge the intensification of diplomacy and dialogue to comprehensively address the underlying security concerns and mistrust between the warring parties. Furthermore, while the pursuit of diplomacy and dialogue is prioritized, we also strongly believe that in parallel, an unconditional withdrawal of the invading troops of Russian Federation from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine is a condition precedent for the restoration of the peace and security of Ukraine. In conclusion, we reiterate our previous calls that the plight of the civilians, particularly women and children, and the growing humanitarian threat should override all other considerations as we seek to stop this needless war. I thank you.
我感谢加纳代表的发言，下面请印度代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for the update, focusing on the safety and security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. We continue to carefully follow developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear facilities. India attaches high importance to ensuring the safety and security of these facilities, as any accident involving nuclear facilities could potentially have disastrous consequences for public health and the environment. We also accord high priority to the discharge by the IAEA of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, objective, and efficient manner, and we value the efforts of the agency in this regard. India remains concerned over the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We support the ongoing efforts, including that of the IAEA, to reduce tensions and steps to ensure nuclear safety and security at the facility. We've noted the latest information available with regard to nuclear power plants and facilities in Ukraine, including the updates published on 19 August by the IAEA. We hope that the proposed visit by a team from the agency to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its surrounding areas will be agreed to by the two sides, as indicated in their recent statements. We continue to reiterate that the global order be anchored on international law, the UN Charter, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. Thank you.
我感谢印度代表的发言，现在请英国代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Undersecretary General DiCarlo for this briefing. The United Kingdom remains gravely concerned about the implications for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia's invasion has disrupted the operation of nuclear facilities across Ukraine, posed a grave threat to operational safety, and prevented Ukrainian authorities from carrying out routine safeguarding tasks. Instead of calling yet another meeting on the crisis at Zaporizhzhia, Russia could resolve it immediately by withdrawing its forces from the plant and all of Ukraine and ceasing its senseless aggression. As well as causing untold suffering to the Ukrainian people, the simple fact is that Russia's invasion and its efforts to seize by force Ukraine's nuclear plants has jeopardized the safety of millions in the region who would be affected by a nuclear incident in Ukraine. Meanwhile, important nuclear safety and safeguards activities at the site are needed more than ever. We welcome progress towards an IAEA technical visit. Any visit should take place in a manner that respects Ukraine's sovereignty over its territory. The Secretary General has been clear that the UN can facilitate a visit from the Ukrainian side, and we welcome his and the UN's engagement. We also welcome the efforts of the Ukrainian administration and of IAEA staff to plan and support a mission, and we call upon Russia to provide appropriate security guarantees. We commend the heroic efforts of Ukrainian staff operating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant despite the great pressure they are under. They must be allowed to carry out their duties without threats or further disruption. cutting off a major supply of electricity to the people of Ukraine would further cause immense suffering, as USG DiCarlo said today. The electricity at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant belongs to Ukraine. Russia's war is reckless and irresponsible. A nuclear disaster should be unthinkable. No member of the United Nations, let alone a permanent member of this council, should bring about that threat by seeking to take another country's nuclear facilities by force. Russia's actions are contrary to the principles of the Convention of Nuclear Safety and other international nuclear safety conventions. So we call once more upon Russia to return full control of all Ukraine's nuclear facilities to their rightful sovereign owner to ensure their safe and secure operation. Thank you.
我感谢英国代表的发言，现在请墨西哥代表发言。
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Señor presidente, agradecemos a la secretaria general adjunta DiCarlo por su presentación sobre la crítica situación de la planta de Zaporizhzhia. Como lo señaló el secretario general, evitar cualquier acción que ponga en peligro la integridad o seguridad de la planta nuclear, la más grande de Europa, deriva del sentido común. Pero el sentido común es a menudo el menos común de los sentidos. Y el secretario general manifestó también en la apertura de la 10ª conferencia de examen del Tratado de No Proliferación de las Armas Nucleares que el mundo ha logrado evitar el uso de las armas nucleares simplemente por suerte. But luck is not a strategy, recalcó el secretario general. Los ataques contra la planta de Zaporizhzhia ponen en jaque su seguridad y podrían tener consecuencias humanitarias catastróficas de corto, mediano y largo plazo, incluso mucho más allá de Ucrania y de sus países vecinos. Coincidimos igualmente con el secretario general que dañar la planta nuclear equivale a un suicidio colectivo. Destacaré 3 puntos. 1, todos los ataques contra la planta y sus alrededores deben cesar de manera inmediata. Cualquier ataque contra instalaciones nucleares civiles constituye una violación flagrante del derecho internacional y del Estatuto del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica. Reiteramos lo mencionado el pasado 11 de agosto. Estos ataques son violatorios del derecho internacional humanitario, incluidos, por supuesto, los convenios de Ginebra de 1949 y su protocolo adicional 1 de 1977. 2. Las instalaciones de la planta no deben utilizarse bajo ninguna circunstancia para realizar operaciones militares. La planta de Zaporizhzhia debe mantenerse al margen de este conflicto. Es prioritario respetar el estatus civil de la planta y retirar de inmediato a todo el personal y equipo militares. La autoridad reguladora ucraniana tiene que tener libertad de acceso y control efectivo sobre el funcionamiento de la planta para que se puedan respetar los 7 pilares indispensables de la seguridad nuclear. 3. Apoyamos la demanda del secretario general de establecer una zona desmilitarizada que permita al Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica llevar a cabo las inspecciones necesarias para poder contar con una información objetiva, veraz e independiente sobre las condiciones que prevalecen en la planta. El Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica hoy nuevamente reiteró su solicitud de llevar a cabo una inspección técnica. Las Naciones Unidas también han afirmado que cuentan con la capacidad logística y de seguridad para apoyar cualquier misión del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica a Zaporizhzhia desde Kiev. siempre y cuando Ucrania y Rusia lleguen a un acuerdo al respecto. Resulta imperativo permitir la inspección sin obstáculos o pretextos. Concluyo reiterando el llamado de México a poner fin a la guerra en Ucrania y a retomar la vía del diálogo. La confrontación de los últimos meses ha tenido un costo enorme sobre la población civil, con consecuencias acaso irreversibles, por lo que no podemos esperar más para poner un alto al fuego. La negociación de los acuerdos sobre los granos es la prueba fehaciente de lo que puede lograrse cuando existe voluntad política y priva la sensatez. Esperemos que lo anterior se reproduzca para lograr un acuerdo sobre Zaporizhzhia, donde lo que está en juego es ni más ni menos, ni menos que el derecho a la vida. Muchas gracias.
我感谢墨西哥代表的发言，下面请法国代表发言。
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je remercie Rosemary DiCarlo pour sa présentation. Monsieur le Président, comme elle l'a fait de manière constante depuis le début de cette guerre, la France exprime sa vive préoccupation face à la menace que fait peser l'agression russe de l'Ukraine sur la sûreté et la sécurité des installations nucléaires ukrainiennes. La centrale de Zaporizhzhia en territoire ukrainien a été saisie de force par la Russie. La présence et les actions des forces armées russes à sa proximité augmentent significativement le risque d'un accident. La Russie porte la responsabilité de cette situation. La France souhaite pour sa part insister sur 3 messages. Premièrement, la Russie doit rendre à l'Ukraine le contrôle total de la centrale nucléaire de Zaporizhzhia ainsi que de toutes les installations nucléaires d'Ukraine. Tous les personnels, tous les matériels militaires russes doivent être retirés instamment de la centrale. Le personnel ukrainien qui exploite la centrale doit pouvoir assumer ses missions sans menace et sans pression. Deuxièmement, la France salue et soutient les efforts qui ont été déployés et qui sont déployés par le directeur général de l'IAEA. Les 7 piliers de la sûreté et de la sécurité nucléaire qui ont été définis par le directeur de l'IAEA doivent être respectés. La capacité de l'IAEA à contrôler les activités nucléaires pacifiques de toute l'Ukraine pour assurer le respect des garanties, capacité compromise par les actions de la Russie, doit également être rétablie. Troisièmement, il est essentiel de faciliter dans les meilleurs délais une mission des experts de l'IAEA à la centrale de Zaporizhzhia. Cette mission doit se faire dans le respect de la pleine souveraineté de l'Ukraine sur son territoire et sur l'ensemble de ses infrastructures. La France salue le rôle des Nations Unies à cet égard, leur disponibilité à assurer le soutien logistique nécessaire au déploiement d'une telle mission depuis Kiev. Elle se félicite également de l'accord de principe donné par l'Ukraine et la Russie à sa tenue, accord confirmé au plus haut niveau. Il faut désormais des garanties de sécurité suffisantes et un engagement de toutes les parties afin que la mission puisse se tenir dans les tout prochains jours. La France continuera d'appuyer au plus haut niveau les efforts de l'IAEA à cette fin, comme l'a fait le président de la République française auprès du président Poutine le 19 août dernier, comme il l'a fait auprès du président Zelensky le 16 août, et comme l'a fait encore ce matin la ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères, Mme Kolodna, à l'occasion de l'échange téléphonique qu'elle a eu avec Sergueï Lavrov. Je vous remercie.
感谢法国代表的发言，下面请肯尼亚代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing on the situation concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It is unfortunate that we are having this discussion for the second time in just over a week, at the tail end of the 10th Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The objective of this treaty is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general and complete disarmament. Mr. President, the deployment of these weapons can have a long-term apocalyptic effect on humanity, biodiversity, and the environment. Indeed, a stray or deliberate targeting of any nuclear installation, even those intended for peaceful purposes, will turn them into nuclear weapons with equally devastating capabilities. We therefore remain deeply concerned that shelling continues around the environs of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is exposing thousands of civilians to grave security risks as well as power cutoffs. In this regard, Kenya welcomes the recent visit to Lviv by the Secretary General and fully supports his plea for the withdrawal of military equipment and personnel, as well as an immediate end to all military activity around what is in fact Europe's largest nuclear power plant to guarantee its safety. We also urge the immediate and unconditional access to the site for experts and officials from the IAEA to conduct the critically needed safety, security, and safeguards verification activities. We welcome the expression of cooperation by the parties in this regard. Mr. President, Kenya continues to call for restraint from any actions that may further escalate the situation. We continue to reiterate, as we have stated time and time again, the need to shift gears to an immediate cessation of hostilities and the deployment of available diplomatic tools to end the conflict. Such a cessation should set the foundation for the negotiation of a lasting peace settlement that guarantees the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, which Kenya continues to reaffirm. I thank you.
我感谢肯尼亚代表的发言，下面请巴西代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. 2 weeks ago, we met in this very chamber to discuss this very topic. We all expressed our concerns with the potentially catastrophic and lasting consequences for human health and the environment that substantial damage to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant would entail. We reaffirmed that any armed attack on and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency, as unanimously recognized by the International Atomic Agency General Conference. We reiterated states' responsibilities to ensure compliance with applicable instruments on nuclear safety and security, such as the Convention on Nuclear Safety, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel, and the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. We agreed it was high time the IAEA deployed an expert mission to the ZNPP without delay. Yet, the situation remains unchanged. Shelling around the ZNPP continues, and we meet once again. Our inability to translate words into actions is pushing us to the brink of reason. 2 weeks ago, the IAEA assessed that the situation posed no immediate threat to nuclear safety. But as the situation drags on, the threat that was once limited becomes an increasingly concrete risk. We renew our call to all parties to refrain from any measure that could jeopardize the safety and security of the ZNPP, as well as its safe operation. Brazil recognizes the indispensable role that the International Atomic Energy Agency can play in taking the necessary steps to help ensure nuclear safety and security and prevent any radiological consequences for the population and the environment in the region and beyond. We therefore welcome news that negotiations for deployment of an IAEA expert mission to Zaporizhzhia are progressing, and we urge the parties to allow its immediate dispatch. And I thank you.
我感谢巴西代表的发言，下面请阿尔巴尼亚代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank USG DiCarlo for her information. Colleagues, we had a meeting on this
very issue less than 2 weeks ago. Our position has not changed, and although we are fully aware of the importance of the matter, there is one simple issue that stands on top of everything. We are here only because of this senseless, unjustified, unprovoked, and illegal war. Everything we have been discussing here on Ukraine during this long 6 months comes from the unjustified actions of Russia, from its war of choice, and now also the continued danger of a nuclear catastrophe. Mr. President, Albania condemns the militarization of nuclear power plant in Ukraine. We condemn any action of violence inside or near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or against its personnel. Ukrainian personnel operating the plant under the Russian invasion must be able to carry out their important tasks without restriction, threats, or pressure. Albania reiterates its full and continued support for the IAEA and its staff to access immediately, safely, and without any impediment all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and engage directly with the responsible Ukrainian staff at the facilities. We support the expert mission to the scene as soon as possible to help stabilize the nuclear safety and security situation at the Zaporizhzhia NPP to conduct safety, security, and safeguards protocols. Mr. President, we remain very worried by the reports that the very reason of the presence of the Russian military personnel at the Ukrainian nuclear plant is to disconnect the power plant from the Ukrainian energy network and divert its energy for Russian interests. We welcome the clear position of SG Guterres on the matter and reiterate our position. Zaporizhzhia power plant is Ukrainian. Its electricity is Ukrainian. Russia and its troops have no place there, no part in it. In conclusion, we reiterate our full solidarity with Ukraine and its people and call again on the Russian Federation to put an end to this war and immediately withdraw all its armed forces from Ukraine, including from Ukrainian nuclear facilities, if they are truly interested in preventing incidents with catastrophic consequences for all of us. There is no reason for Russian troops to be in Ukraine. There is no need for Russian troops to be in a nuclear power plant. Thank you.
我感谢阿尔巴尼亚代表的发言。下面我以中国代表身份发言。我感谢迪卡洛副秘书长的通报。安理会上次审议乌克兰核设施安全问题时，各成员均对扎波罗热核电站的安全状况表达了关切。令人担忧的是，该核电站近日仍在遭受炮击。尽管炮击尚未对核电站的安全造成直接威胁，但正如国际原子能机构总干事格罗西所说，这种情况随时可能改变。核设施的安全和安保问题没有试错余地，任何一次意外事故都可能导致严重的核事故，对乌克兰和周边国家的生态环境和公共健康造成不可挽回的后果。中方再次呼吁有关各方保持最大克制，严格遵守相关国际法规定，认真落实格罗西总干事提出的7项支柱原则，避免采取危及核安全和安保的行动，把意外风险降到最低。中方一贯支持国际原子能机构严格按照授权履行保障监督职责，在促进核安全、核安保问题上发挥积极作用。当前形势下，国际原子能机构有必要尽快赴扎波罗热核电站进行实地考察，对核设施安全和安保情况进行专业技术评估。我们注意到，俄罗斯和乌克兰都对访问做出了积极表态，希望有关各方排除政治障碍， 加强沟通协作，坚持问题导向，尽早就访问的时间和细节达成一致，让国际原子能机构访问团及时成行。各位同事，处理核设施的安全和安保问题，必须坚持科学理性，坚持人道精神，坚持沟通合作，应当超越政治立场，超越敌对分歧，超越军事考量。我们绝不能让切尔诺贝利核事故和福岛核事故的惨剧重演。要从根本上消除扎波罗热核电站的核安全风险，国际社会必须以负责任的方式推动局势缓和降温，在外交努力和政治解决上下功夫，引导当事方重回对话谈判，早日实现停火止战。中方再次呼吁有关各方重视彼此合理安全关切，构建均衡、有效、可持续的安全架构，为乌克兰危机的妥善解决和地区的持久和平稳定做出不懈努力。我现在恢复行使安理会主席的职能。我注意到俄罗斯代表要求再次发言，下面我请俄罗斯代表发言。
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Мы собрались сегодня, потому что причины, которые заставили нас затребовать эту встречу, никуда не исчезли. Обстрелы ЗАЭС и Энергодара со стороны вооруженных сил Украины продолжаются, несмотря на то, что на атомной электростанции нет российских тяжелых вооружений и огонь оттуда не ведется. Мы об этом неоднократно говорили, и это может быть подтверждено данными объективного контроля, в том числе спутниковыми, включая спутниковыми. Но сегодня мы опять услышали старую пластинку: во всем виновата Россия. Реальная подоплека событий вокруг Запорожской атомной электростанции беспардонно искажается, очевидные факты замалчиваются или отрицаются. Все это делается с одной единственной целью – обелить своих киевских подопечных, что бы они ни делали, предоставляем карт-бланш на любые самые безрассудные действия в расчете на то, что они будут в любом случае оправданы своими покровителями. Нас вновь призывают согласиться на визит миссии МАГАТЭ, на который мы дали согласие еще в июне и неоднократно подтверждали, в том числе сегодня. Некоторым западным коллегам кажется, что есть единственный и самый простой выход из этой ситуации – вывести российские войска и создать демилитаризованную зону вокруг Запорожской атомной электростанции. Это безответственное заявление, совершенно не учитывающее необходимость поддержания условий для безопасного функционирования Запорожской АЭС. Мы еще раз призываем вас прекратить покрывать ваших киевских подопечных и побудить их прекратить безрассудные атаки ЗАЭС, грозящие ядерным инцидентом и радиоактивным заражением европейских стран. Благодарю вас.
我感谢俄罗斯代表的发言，现在请乌克兰代表发言。
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I would like to thank Under-Secretary General DiCarlo for her informative briefing. I wish we had been gathered here by Russia to hear the only thing that the entire world wants to hear, and that is a statement that Russia demilitarizes Zaporizhzhia NPP withdraws its troops and hands it over to the government of Ukraine. Instead, we wasted more than 1 hour to listen to a slew of fictitious sound bites. The terrorist state does not stop playing around with the international community. Once again, it has the audacity to convene a UN Security Council meeting to discuss its own provocations, its own terror at the ZNPP. Let me reiterate, the current situation makes it clear that all that will ultimately remove the nuclear threats stemming from the illegal Russian presence at the nuclear power plant is the withdrawal of the Russian weapons and troops and the return of the station to the legitimate control by Ukraine. Ukraine greatly appreciates the efforts of the IAEA and the UN to ensure the safety and security of all Ukrainian nuclear facilities against the backdrop of the Russian invasion. We have always underlined the importance of the full and consistent implementation by the agency of its mandate. In this regard, since the beginning of Russia's occupation of ZNPP, Ukraine has insisted on the need to send a mission to the site and has negotiated its modalities with the IAEA. We welcome the readiness of the IAEA Director General to send the mission to the occupied ZNPP, and the visit should be conducted in strict compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and with full respect of its international obligations. Earlier today, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba has responded to the Director General's letter dated August 17th regarding the above mission. As follows from the letter, the IAEA proposal for the itinerary is in compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and in general might be accepted. Further arrangements are to be made based on the security conditions and require communication of detailed route plans and other logistical aspects as soon as possible. We continue to believe that the mission's effectiveness can be bolstered by incorporating military and political components backed by UN expertise. Considering the scale of the current challenges and threats, we also urge the IAEA to consider a permanent presence of its experts at the ZNPP until the competent Ukrainian authorities regain full control over this nuclear facility. Russian demonstration of the wish to organize the mission to the ZNPP has only one purpose. Let's proceed from the basics. ZNPP is a Ukrainian facility located on Ukrainian territory. The occupiers have trained some of the hostages in what they should say and what they shouldn't show to the IAEA. That is why it is really important to conduct the mission in a way that would allow the international community to see the real situation and not a Russian theatrical show. It is imperative that the mission takes place, A, at the request of Ukraine, B, at the Ukrainian nuclear facility, C, is covered by the agreement on the application of safeguards between Ukraine and the IAEA. Russia's role is to ensure the physical security of the mission. Russia is turning the issue of nuclear safety at the facility into a farce, a circus. It downplays the significance of the threats it has created and diverts attention from the urgent issue of demilitarization and deoccupation of the station. The entire international community has been demanding this for almost 6 months. This is what the IAEA says. Russia pretends not to hear this and continues to invent newer and newer ways of using the peaceful station for military purposes. It is obvious that any mission, be it the IAEA or the UN, while at the station, will record flagrant violations of norms and requirements for nuclear safety. Therefore, Russia is trying to avoid responsibility, but it will not succeed. Russia needs the ZNPP as a means of waging war. But there is another aspect. Russia is trying at any cost to cover the needs of the temporarily occupied Crimea and other TOT, perhaps Zaporizhzhia, Kherson regions. In electricity, because the publicized illegal electric bridge has never covered these needs and will not cover them. Moreover, Russia needs the ZNPP for propaganda purposes, because the deoccupation of the plant will mean a failure of Putin's campaign in the south of Ukraine. Now about shelling. Russian narratives about Ukrainian shelling of the station do not stand up to scrutiny. Nobody who is at least conscious can imagine that Ukraine would target a nuclear power plant at tremendous risk of nuclear catastrophe on its own territory. Such a catastrophe would lead to numerous deaths and pollution for many years to come. We have already lost thousands of human lives and thousands of square kilometers of our territory of the exclusion zone around Chernobyl after 1986. We are mourning thousands of lives of Ukrainians killed by Russians in their war against Ukraine. We suffer from genocide conducted by Russians on the occupied territories. There, they kidnap thousands of children left orphaned after their parents are killed by the Russian army. We will never forget it, and we will do everything to save each Ukrainian life. What we can do here in the UN format is to name things as they are. Russians forget that we live in a century of modern technologies. As their crimes in Bucha and Mariupol were clearly seen from satellite, the shelling under the false flag will be clearly filmed again. Dear colleagues, turning back to the international mission to the ZNPP, let me stress that the need to send such a mission to the ZNPP is primarily due to violations of all 7 pillars of nuclear and nuclear security that arose as a result of the illegal presence there of the Russian army and Rosatom. The constant presence of the IAEA and other experts at the station could become a determining factor in the context of its demilitarization and deoccupation. The international community, in its turn, must continue to apply political pressure on the aggressor state of Russia and demand full demilitarization and unconditional deoccupation. Let me stress that nuclear security and safety is an absolute priority for everyone in the world, and Russia must immediately and without any conditions withdraw its troops. Stop all provocations, all shelling. It is unacceptable that Russia is deliberately putting all of us on the brink of a global nuclear disaster. As soon as Russia withdraws its troops from the facility, on which they simply have no right to be, the threat of a nuclear disaster will disappear. Just a similar threat disappeared as soon as Russian troops withdrew from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the exclusion zone. And this threat will no longer exist, just as it does not exist at 3 other Ukrainian nuclear power plants: Khmelnytsky NPP, Rivne NPP, and South Ukraine NPP. I thank you.
感谢乌克兰代表的发言。如果没有成员再次要求发言的话，我宣布现在休会。
Juntar, pode amanhã, fazer com o Jean, tá. Então eu faço e mando pro Fabiano, que é de amanhã que vai fazer o Fabiano. É, porque eu acho que precisa de outro relato mesma coisa, né? Tá ótimo. Eu falo com o Fabiano, eu faço o que teve hoje, me manda pra ele incorpora, né, de amanhã. É. No discurso de amanhã ele disse que incluiu também um pedacinho sobre Zaporizhzhia.
'Real evidence of the NPP shelling, which they claim Russia is doing as if it is shelling itself. I can share it with you. You can get acquainted with it. There's another topic that I raised today: the killing of Daria Dugin in Moscow, which was made on a clear terrorist basis, I would say. And this is the infamous Ukrainian site Mirotvorets, which showed her picture there with the inscription "liquidated," eliminated. Get acquainted with that too. So what will happen tomorrow, we'll discuss tomorrow, all right?
Ambassador, how do you respond to the West accusations that Russia is going to attack Kyiv and make an assault?
I haven't seen those accusations in at least in recent days. Where did you find them?
They're telling citizens they should leave, American citizens to leave Kyiv and so on.
U.S. made what do you call it, an advice to their citizens to leave Kyiv. I don't know what it is related to.
What's holding up the mission into the IAEA mission? What's the holdup?
Well, I think they discuss in technical details. We've been saying consistently we are in favor of the mission. We agreed to the mission as early as early June. and it was not our fault that the mission was not affected at that time. We know whom to blame, but I will not say it clearly now. But now I think it's on the way. We are proceeding with that. I hope as early as perhaps late August, early September, the mission may take place.
And you're okay with the mission coming in through Kyiv?
That is being negotiated and discussed. I don't know the details, but thank you.